Let's talk about 9/11. I always think it's important. It's been 21 years. Sometimes when I look at our demographic data, it's stunning because a sizable chunk of our audience, Krystal, has no memory of 9/11 or was not even alive on 9/11. I can wrap my head around no memory because I was young, but not alive is crazy.
Yeah.
You are now eligible to drink if you were born on 9/12/2001.
The dude who just won the U.S. Open, Carlos Alcaraz,
yes.
not born on 9/11.
He's 19 years old.
Crazy.
I mean,
that guy's
it's
a
nuts.
phenom, by the way.
The reason I think it's important in order to do these segments, not just about the day itself, although I do encourage people, there's books like The Looming Tower and things like that people should check out, is, I was just young enough to remember that there was a before time. And to try and describe what that time in America was like compared to the post 9/11 era is really difficult. And I always come back to this clip. Steve Kornacki tweeted it out last year. It's just been on my mind really ever since. It's the last broadcast from NBC News on the night of September 10th, 2001. And just the concerns and what's happening, it just seemed so pedestrian, to compare to eventually what we knew was happening. So let's take a listen to that, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
It's the economy, and it's not going well. President Bush under new pressure to stop the slide. Will another tax cut turn it around? In depth tonight, the right stuff. No engines, more than 300 on board. The pilots land the plane, but new questions. Was it heroic flying or an avoidable mistake? Lifeline, new hope for a test to predict the risk of Alzheimer's. But would you really want to know the truth? And the fleecing of America. They call it the fountain of youth. Tonight, new information on the danger and waste of money involving those popular herbal supplements.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. President Bush tonight is under increasing pressure to do something about the troubles in the American economy, troubles that have a ripple effect around the world. There is no sign of a recovery anywhere, anytime soon, and the consequences are piling up every day. We begin tonight with NBC's David Gregory, who is traveling with the president in Florida. David?
And Tom, many of those consequences are political, both for the president and congressional Republicans who have an election next year. It is Republicans who are putting increasing pressure on the president to do something more for the economy, and soon.
As somebody pointed out, he found a way to boost the economy, all right. He certainly did, didn't he?
True.
Unfortunately. Yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, David Gregory was there, Florida. That's where President Bush was on the day of 9/11, famously, with all those school kids. It's also just funny, when they think about the numbers, like $1 trillion deficit. I'm like, yeah, wow. Can't imagine that one. Just wait to see what Iraq turns out to be. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I think it's fascinating to think about what life was like before that, not even the security state, but just the way the United States was perceived, our economic strength. I mean, the president getting a blowjob in the Oval Office was like the worst thing that had happened in this country. It like tore everything apart. He still left with 60-something% approval rating. We had a budget surplus. It's like the extent to how the economy was the unipolar moment of what we were at from a strength-wise, and how it was all squandered by the Bush administration post 9/11. I don't know. It's sad to me that people who were born after have no memory of that. They only have memory of the turmoil.
The horror of that day, which is unspeakable, in the end didn't come close to the horror of our response and what it did to our country, what it did to the world. I was reflecting on, there's a lot of conversation about Biden and calling Republicans fascist and Trump and all this stuff. Murtaza Hussain of The Intercept had this tweet thread that I've really been thinking about, and he said, I still consider the high watermark of what felt like fascism in the U.S. the Bush-Cheney years, extrajudicial disappearances, state-sanctioned torture, expanding list of wars. Most of the media transformed into cheerleading zombies. Nothing since compares with that. He goes on to say, substantively speaking, the Bush years had the most practical steps taken towards an actual fascist government, including attempts to legally grant the executive absolute power. And there was just almost no room for dissent.
No.
And you had, and the population was so shocked and horrified, understandably, by that day, that then a bipartisan group of leaders, including Bush, including our current president, really came together to create this huge, massive amounts of executive power, torture, Gitmo, Abu Ghraib, I mean, all of these unbelievable abuses. And now, in hindsight, we have a different view of the Iraq War, we have a different view of this time period, but it's not like those powers have been rolled back. We've only continued further and further and further down that road. So it is worth reflecting on the way that we responded and the way that shaped our society, and the fact that, you know, that was really the moment when we could have invested a lot in our future, invested a lot here, you know, gotten Jackson, Mississippi, a freaking working like water supply, and other places around the country, like rebuilding our infrastructure, making sure we're set up for the next century. And we didn't do that. Instead, we thought we could spread democracy around the world, killing hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, massive cost to our own citizens, population, of course, to our men and women in uniform. Huge, huge, devastating mistake for our nation and also for the world.
Yeah, I mean, people always are like, you know, why do you hate Bush so much? It's like, it's difficult to describe if you understood where we were and where we could have gone and what happened. I mean, September 12, 2001, exactly 21 years ago today, is when Paul Wolfowitz, George W. Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, and others made the decision to start using 9/11 to link to Saddam Hussein and set the stage for the eventual invasion of Iraq, the squandering of $6 trillion, not to mention thousands of American soldiers and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Iraqis, Syrians, and others who paid the price. It's like that decision was one of the worst decisions and responses by an American president, a conscious decision, a man thrust into the office who had to respond. I mean, it's really put him up there with like James Buchanan in terms of you didn't meet the moment, and millions of people paid the price as a result of that. And it's one of those areas where sometimes you have things which are structural forces, right? Which is things happening in Europe and others.
That's true.
Certainly you can't control 9/11, but you can control the response. And by having a bad response, you effectively set the stage to where we are today. So I really think everything hinges on 9/11. Everything as to where we are. Donald Trump
today.
I mean, I was much more hot about this a year ago because it was 20 years and also we were coming off the Afghan withdrawal. But this time it seemed like it kind of just went under the radar. And I, you know, never forget, shouldn't just be about what happened on the day of 9/11. I mean, I don't ever forget what happened in response. And all those people are fat and filthy rich, you know, as a result. Dick Cheney is a hero. George W. Bush is some pro-democracy figure. Condoleezza Rice, I think she worked for the NFL or something like Dropbox board. Paul Wolfowitz is fine. I saw him the other day on the street. You know,
not to mention all these defense contractors.
Put them aside. I'm saying the people who actually got us into our Doug Feith, you know, all these people, they're fine. They've got big ass homes in McLean in Northern Virginia. They're multimillionaires. They'll die fat and happy. And it's like there's a lot of people who didn't die. Who didn't die happy or who died very premature deaths as a result of their decision, and they'll never be held accountable for it. And even more unfortunately, I think the media today, people like Nicole Wallace and others, David Frum, I mean, they
totally
committed
invested in resuscitating.
They committed unforgivable sins, and we have somehow just whitewashed against it. So, you know, with Trump and all this, like, I always look at it as I'm like, if you don't understand just how bad the Bush years were for the country, for everything, and are unable to adjust your magnitude and more, like, I really can't.
We do not have to rehab George W. Bush.
Yes, you do not, in fact, have to do that.
You don't have to do that. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.